Welcome back, everybody, to like our fourth or fifth long format build guide video. Today we're going over the Psyker. So before we continue any further, please like, comment, subscribe, criticize down below. Greatly appreciated to my very young channel. More subscribers help us grow a lot. We're on our way to monetization. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this classic Psyker build. So this is my Psyker. There's lots of ways you can run the Psyker. In fact, I have another like Soulblaze only, just everything Soulblaze. Don't care how good the build is, it's just Soulblaze everything build that I'm going to make as well, but I think it's also a fairly good build. It's not the best, but it's good. But for today we have this build, and we will have other content linked above and below related to this, as well as a shorter build guide and other related content, as well as a live stream that I did with this build and some other gameplay maybe, who knows. Jumping into it, I'm using the Deimos Blaze Force Sword because I think it looks funny. We all know what it looks like. And we want high damage, high finesse, high first target. Finesse is not a huge deal. Finesse is your crit multiplier, and we don't have a ton of crit chance on this. For our perks, I definitely run Carapace and Maniac, armor damage, maybe weak spot damage if you want to, instead of Maniac. Definitely Carapace armor damage, because we're using this to supplement this build struggling with high priority targets. Armored targets like Carapace targets. So I'm using this Blaze Force Sword. We definitely want something like Uncanny Strike, which is giving rending on weak spot hits. But in addition, I have Riposte, but that's locked onto mine. Anything that increases power on repeated hit or weak spot hit or rending or crit chance is all good. Riposte is probably not the best one because it's unsuccessful dodge, and registering those dodges is kind of skimpy in this game, but I just haven't made a perfect sword. And other options are running the Chain Sword, is fantastic, and gearing it towards taking on armored and heavy unyielding targets and maniacs is great. And then also taking like the dueling sword is also fantastic. I don't have a good dueling sword, so take a dueling sword is great. Probably I'm using the Deimos. The dueling sword probably does everything the Deimos does, but better. But I'm just using the Deimos sword and the brain burst because I want to, and I think it's fun and it looks funny. And then we have the Purgatos Force Staff, which is the main bread and butter of this build. On this, you want to have high damage, high cloud radius is also very helpful, high burn, and decent warp resistance. Quell speed, also not that important. Warp resistance, quell speed are probably your more dumpy stats than the other three. And for our perks, I'm taking flak armored enemies. That way we can chew through hordes of flaks as well, because we can get hordes of flak armored smaller enemies, and you can also get hordes of unarmored enemies, but the unarmored enemies take a lot of damage from us. Flak, our damage struggles a little bit to keep up with the rest of the horde, so we take flak armored enemies, clear those guys out a little faster. And then I'm taking increased range crit strike chance. So crit hits on force staffs are weird, so you might be tempted to take, and I additionally was tempted to take this in before, was to take increased crit hit damage as well. But that 10% crit damage, actually, I don't think it even does anything, which is ridiculous that it even exists on the weapon in the first place then. Or it might be broken, or it might actually do something now, in which case it's good. But it didn't used to do something, as far as we could tell, and that would be giving you 10% more damage on a crit hit. But we're applying Soulblaze stacks. We don't do crit damage. I don't know. It's weird, and there's no way to know if it works. But what we can do is take crit strike chance, which is great. So other than crit strike chance increased by 5%, you could take unarmored enemy damage would be fine. Maniac damage would be fine. Any of those would be good. But we want increased crit strike chance because when we hit crits with Soulblaze, that actually applies double Soulblaze. And that's using your left click, your primary fire, which has a lot of stagger, and then using your right click, hopefully it should apply double Soulblaze as well. I like to use the secondary attack a lot more than the primary attack. It's kind of finicky. Nobody really knows the correct damage profile because it's impossible to kind of test and the game's buggy. Then for blessings, I'm taking Warp Nexus and Warp Flurry for crits, because with this build, by the end of a good game, you can hit up to 2,000 crits, is the most I've ever hit with this build in one game, which is an insane amount of crit hits for any build in this game. So we're stacking crit chance with Warp Nexus based on our current peril level, and then Warp Flurry, we're taking reduced train charge attack time. Another blessing that you could really take instead of possibly Warp Flurry, or I would definitely keep Warp Nexus, but maybe instead of Warp Flurry, you take the it's not Terrifying Barrage, but it's another blessing that essentially lets you suppress surrounding enemies while using your secondary action. That would be great because they keep the horde back off of you if they're running over you. For this build in particular, I find it's very difficult to kill yourself and overcharge, so not using an extra wound, but we're taking 2 max healths and a toughness, and you obviously want damage resistance to gunners, maybe plus toughness, auto dockets, max health, you know. Yeah, it's up to you. You just definitely want more bulk for your Psyker and damage resistance to gunners, because gunners are annoying. And then we will get into the talents. So, for the talents, I have... So somebody's telling me that Warp Expenditure is better than Metal in every way. I disagree. I think they're fine. I think either way is fine. I mean, Warp Expenditure is definitely more consistent, but Metal replenishes more toughness than, I don't know, 2.5% for 10% peril generated. That's if you generate 100% peril, you replenish 25 toughness. But I suppose that as we're soul blazing a lot, maybe it could be good. I don't know. I take the metal because we hit a ton of crits with this build. So we take metal, crit hits replenish 5% toughness, and also grant 5% increased movement speed for 4 seconds. That's something on top of Warp Expenditure that Warp Expenditure does not give. And then we have Perfect Timing, 3% warp damage for 10 seconds on crit hits, stacks 5 times. So that gives our warp attacks more damage, hopefully, if the game is working correctly. And then we have Soul Stealer, 7.5% toughness on warp attack kill. We kill tons of stuff with our Soulblaze, so definitely want Soul Stealer. Quietude, finish 5% toughness for each 10% peril quelled. We take that because we really want to get to this battle meditation, and I suppose instead of going Quietude, you could come to Warp Expenditure and then come down to battle meditation as well. It's up to you, and you have to get the Soulblaze perks for this build just because they're fun. You want to have them. So you take Perilous Combustion, killing an elite or specialist enemy, apply Soulblaze to everybody nearby, causing damage over time. Fantastic. More toughness. Here's where something where you could totally differ from me. I use Smite. If a large horde of armored enemies comes up, you give them the old Smiteroo, and you just hold them back for a little bit. Additionally, you can run Brain Rupture, Brain Burst with maybe Kinetic Flare would be fun to use on the build, but it'd be kind of inconsistent. That does give you the chance to Brain Burst armored enemies while purging, and that could be nice. That could help you, but it's really random and not very consistent, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But running Brain Burst for armored targets is absolutely an option on this build. Then when you come down to, so you could just come through here and take some of these Brain Bursts instead of going through Smite. I use Smite because I like to just, if there's a large wave of armored targets and my team needs a little more time to chew through them, smiting them, in my opinion, is more valuable, and letting my teammates deal with it is more valuable than me trying to do some weird dodge dance Brain Burst thing and hoping I get them, because to be honest, the Brain Burst doesn't do that much damage. Or it doesn't do enough damage, and it's slow, and it's, yeah, it's meh. But it does let you take care of snipers at long distance, so you have that. Then we have our next perk, which is -5 peril generation. Great. Wildfire is absolutely critical for this build. When enemy dies while affected by your Soulblaze nearby enemies, gain up to 4 stacks of Soulblaze. So this is spreading your Soulblaze that you're applying to guys around and clearing out entire hordes, causing 1 beam of Soulblaze to spread throughout entire hordes for a long time. Fantastic ability. And we take toughness damage reduction. I'm taking this damage to elite enemies, but you could come through here and take Seer's Presence. I'm going to have a totally different build featuring Soulblaze and things like that later on. So you could come through Seer's Presence and do Telekine Shield and all kinds of weird stuff if you wanted to. It is really hard to blow yourself up with this build, so instead of doing Venting Shriek and Kinetic Presence, you could come through here and take Seer's Presence and take Empathic Evasion, lets you be more effective in melee, go through toughness damage reduction, then take Telekine Shield and Telekine Dome. This will protect you from gunners while you're out in the middle of battle, in the middle of the open with your Berg Staff. But the reason I'm taking Venting Shriek is because it quells 50% peril. That's nice. If you accidentally overcharge yourself, that's nice, although I've never overcharged myself with this build, essentially. And in the event you do, we have 10% chance to quell 10% peril on kill. And you'll find when you're using this build, sometimes you run out of peril. Like, you go down in peril. the amount of automatic quell on this build is insane when you're shooting into hordes. So Venting Shriek, not super crucial. You definitely don't have to have Venting Shriek. You can definitely go a different way if you'd like. But what I do like to have is it gives you minus peril generation. That's nice. But this minus 1 to... the Venting Shriek applies 1 to 6 stacks of Soulblaze on targets. I mean, it's part of the build. It's the Soulblaze. We want all the Soulblaze, right? Because it's the fun. That's the fun part. That's the power trip. You're using Soulblaze on people. So we take this Venting Shriek, applies Soulblaze to enemies in front of you, knocks them back a little bit, maybe staggers them, lets you keep, quells your peril, lets you keep purge staffing everybody. It's a fun time. That's why I use it. All right, it just makes sense. It just makes sense. Then we take minus more peril generation, fantastic. Plus health, that's fantastic. Warp Rider, because plus 20% damage from all sources based on peril is kind of a no-brainer. Then we have a plus 5% crit chance because we want more crit chance on the build. We're already running Warp Nexus plus a few crit chance multipliers. Let's see, then we have 50% radius on your coherency aura. Nice. Toughness damage reduction, nice. Increased quell speed, that's useful. 15 toughness, good. We're really just coming through this branch to get to the warp charges. I mean, Empowered Psychonics doesn't really have any use here because we're not really relying on our Blitz ability. And then, you know, you could come over to Disrupt Density if you wanted to. Don't really know why you would. I think the warp charges really, Warp Siphon, warp charges really makes the most sense for this build. And that's because Warp Siphon, you get warp charges. That's going to give you combat ability cooldown when you click F, so you're going to get this Venting Shriek back really fast, or your Telekine Dome, especially so if you go through Seer's Presence and you're using Warp Siphon, you know, you can get a lot of cooldown on your Telekine Dome or your Venting Shriek again, which is then you can apply more Soulblaze to enemies. And then we take Inner Tranquility, which is minus peril generation, fantastic. So we can just purge forever. As long as there's a horde in front of you, you can just keep purging. Then we have Empyrean Empowerment, increase base damage by 4% per warp charge, so we can get up to 6 warp charges once we get this last one, so that's plus 24% base damage. Fantastic. That stacks with Warp Rider and Perfect Timing. So all that stacked together is a great increase to base damage. Infire Reborn this is the only real way to run Infire Reborn, is killing an enemy with Soulblaze. So this is not saying killing them with Soulblaze applied to them. This is not while they're affected by Soulblaze. This is killing them with Soulblaze. So running Infire Reborn on other builds, maybe you're applying Soulblaze to groups of enemies and then you're killing them with some other weapon, is not actually going to help you with Infire Reborn. It makes it very inconsistent. So if you're not using the Purg Staff, I don't really know why you use Infire Reborn. There might be some situations where you would. But Psychic Vampire is good for if you're not running the Purg Staff. But since we're running the Purg Staff, 10% chance. Essentially, if you kill anything with your Purg Staff, you're using fire, you're using the secondary fire, you're beaming into guys, you're getting kills. Every one of those kills gives you a 10% chance to give you a warp charge, and then you can store up to 6 warp charges. So you'll find that in a large horde, you'll be purging, then you can Venting Shriek on them, and you'll apply tons of Soulblaze all over them, you'll lose some warp charge, whatever, but this releases all your warp charges. So you had 6 warp charges, you had plus 24% base damage and minus peril generation as well. Now it's all gone. But you'll find that if you're doing this correctly into a horde in large, overwhelming areas, sometimes you will recharge your warp charges almost instantly. Other times you'll get 4 warp charges back in like 5 seconds. It's very easy to regain your warp charges incredibly fast on this build, so that's why we take that. So overall, that is my classic Purg Psyker build. Now there's also going to be another one I'm going to come out with where I go through the Telekine Dome and Seer's Presence potentially. I think that could be really interesting. Overall, this build hits a ton of crits. It does good horde clear. It is a classic Purg Staff build. There's nothing fancy about it. There's nothing weird about it. This is the classic Purg Psyker build. So I guess I can run into the Pyskhanium for you guys. I mean, we're only at 14 minutes on the video. It's very fast for an in-depth build guide. There's just nothing too fancy about this build. You're just purging all the guys. So we'll hop into the meat grinder here and give it a look-sees. Alright, let's see. So against, we'll just make our way around town. So against carapace armored enemies, you'll notice we don't do particularly well whatsoever. You can see how our warp next or warp shard, warp flurry lets us charge up better, but against carapace armored enemies, you really should not be perk staffing. As you can see, base 3 fully charged. It doesn't do anything. It does nothing to them. So what we really want to do is take this bad boy out and give him some weak spot hits, and we have no charged up attacks at the moment. So even against these guys with this sword, it's not the greatest. That's why you might want to take Brain Burst. Why is it 156? Am I reading that right? Wait, is that saying? Oh, hold on. Alright, so we'll hit him with a heavy attack. 144,300. Oh no, it's stacking into the second. It looks like it says 140, which is just incorrect, obviously. But okay, moving on. You want to definitely be using your warp charge attack on these guys and getting the stab. Let's see if the secondary stab does more warp charge damage. It does a little bit more maybe, or we got a warp charge. So you can go in with the normal heavy or the light. Doesn't really matter, I don't think, for the warp charge. We do have rending on weak spot hit, so perhaps a couple weak spot hits and then a attack would do a little bit more damage. Spook. Alright, we have these guys, the bulwarks, so you can pop around, hit them a few times. If you have more warp charges up, we're at 6 warp charges now, actually. You know, I could do a little better. This build does not excel in killing these big guys, like I said, so you might want to take unyielding damage, would help clear out these two guys if you're having trouble with them. But they take more damage from the perk staff overall as well. So if you're hitting them with the perk staff, you can actually build up the stacks on these guys quite effectively. You know, he's getting staggered by this. The bulwark as well, if you're getting around their shield. If that's the question. They'll get staggered by your warp char, your Soulblaze, let me say. And they'll take a decent amount of damage as well. So it's really just carapace armored enemies we're having a problem with. Now we have stacked up a lot of damage for taking on flak armored enemies. That's why we're taking plus flak armored damage, because you see these guys don't die right away. So having that extra flak armored damage really helps us out. This guy is characterized as a flak armored enemy to the body as well, so that helps us take care of these crushers, is what they're called, right? No, scab maulers. That helps us take care of these scab maulers and crushers. So the crushers are just all around hard for us to deal with the perk staff. But these flak armored enemies, including these scab maulers, are not hard to deal with the perk staff, and we're actually quite effective at taking them on. And we have our unarmored kind of add enemies, so like I said, we could take unarmored damage as well instead of taking 5% crit chance. We burn through those guys absolutely ridiculously fast. Let's see how this next stack as well. So we have some scab and flak we have some flak armors here. We burn through them as well. These are going to be making up large amounts of horde enemies that you'll have to deal with. These guys are just a standard horde. You give them a good old solid purg as well, and these guys are absolutely non-problematic. And if you take unarmored damage on top of that, you're going to absolutely annihilate them. These infested enemies are a little more tanky, and so as a result, they take a fraction of a second more to burn through. And you'll see as we're killing these enemies, our Soulblaze from Wildfire is applying onto these next enemies. And you can come here. You can give these guys the Soulblaze as well. Melt through them as well. Melt through these guys as well. You really just melt through everything. I like to do the primary attack. That brings us to the secondary attack that I forgot to talk about this entire time. And that would be just hitting these guys like this. The secondary attack is particularly useful, say if you have a Dreg Rager running at you, giving him the secondary, or your primary attack, is fantastic. Have I been saying secondary? This is the secondary attack. This is the primary attack. Primary left click. The primary left click on this attack is fantastic for its stagger potential. So if a dog's about to jump on you, stagger, especially a... There's no pox bursters in here. I'm just realizing that. There's no pox boosters in the train. That's ridiculous. Anyways, anybody's running at you, these Scab Ragers might be a little harder to stagger. Just give them 2 or 3 more hits with it. You'll probably stagger them. These guys absolutely staggered. Overall, the primary attack is fantastic at staggering enemies. If a Pox Burster is about to jump on you, give them the wave. It will absolutely stagger them off of you. The primary attack is also, I think, really good at quickly applying Soulblaze stacks, potentially. I don't know. People really like to spam the primary attack. I personally like to use the secondary attack a lot more than the primary attack. You will get staggers with the secondary attack as well, but it is not as quick to stagger as the others. And so using our warp charges, okay, let's see here. So we've got 6 warp charges right now. Where's a group of a lot of enemies? There's 6 guys right here. We just got a warp charge from somebody dying to our Soulblaze right there. Let's see, we see these enemies. So let's see, we have enemies off screen right here, and we have enemies on screen right here. If you use your venting streak, you're going to apply warp charge, you're going to apply Soulblaze to these guys. It's very inconsistent on who it actually applies the Soulblaze to. And we don't have a lot of guys here in front of us, so we haven't applied, it doesn't apply it behind you either, which is annoying to me. But as you can see, we absolutely burned through these guys. And at the moment, we got kind of unlucky with generating warp charges. But also keep in mind, there's not that many enemies on screen. In an actual level 5 damnation game, you know, there would be 30 or 40 of these guys point blank right in front of you, and at a 10% chance, that means killing all 30 of these enemies, which would take you approximately this long, would have like a guaranteed chance of giving you at least, essentially, a guaranteed chance of giving you at least 3 warp charges. And a little more luck, you get some more, a little less. You know, it varies because it's statistical, but whacking these dudes, whacking these guys. And the reason I really like to take this sword is just so you can run around and poke guys in the head like this. As you can see, I think it's fun to just boop, boop, boop. You know, sue me. I like to poke guys with the weenie sword in the head. Poke, 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 poke. I mean, they're easy to kill. So guys, that is pretty much the Purg Psyker. Like I said, there's not a lot of fanciness to it. It's the Purg Psyker. So, without further ado, thank you guys for watching. If you like content, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you guys, and have a wonderful day. Go Purg some dudes. Remember, just, you know, dodge dance a little bit if you're getting overran. I find that Terrifying Barrage is not that needed, because if you're getting overran, you just dodge a little. It's not Terrifying Barrage either. I know it's the other one. Whatever. Anyways, see you guys later.